Innovation nowadays is one of the most important sources for achieving competitive advantage, and creativity has become a crucial essence of every innovative business. Successful entrepreneurship, therefore, requires a focus on creativity, integrating innovation, and strategic business practices. Let's listen to some first-hand experience on how creative minds can boost your business.
Hello, and I hope you are doing really well. Now is on the next topic, and we are talking creative disruption. I know right now, somewhere out there, Schumpeter's going, that sounds really good. Anyway, we have a keynote coming up and a panel, and I can already see big smiles out there. And as always, if you have questions, do write them in the comments, and we will be asking them shortly. Without any further ado, I have a very special person lining up already. And, you know, there's so much I could say about her, but what I find quite interesting is her background. It's in anthropology and fashion. And she's lived in Brazil, Israel, Germany, Sri Lanka, and Portugal. Now, if that's not a global mind in a huge spectrum, I don't know what else is. She'll be talking about the value of taking a break, and her name is Natalie W. Nixon. Welcome to our stage, Natalie.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. Hello, everyone. I'm really excited to be with you today, and particularly to share on this idea of the value of the pause. And I actually want to first start with just reminding you and asking you, if you feel so moved, if there's any ideas that you hear today that you'd like to share on social media, please share by tagging Creativity Leap. And you can find me on social media at Nat W. Nixon. So I'd love to continue our conversation afterwards. So definitely share out on questions and ideas. I want to start with a very short story related to part of the way that I grew up. I am from the United States. I'm from the East Coast of the United States in a relatively older city in the US called Philadelphia. And not as old as cities in Europe, of course, because the United States is a lot younger country, but it has a lot of history. Philadelphia was actually the first capital of the United States, during the writing of the Declaration of Independence and all that sort of chapter of history. And one of the group of people who were very prominent and active was a religious group of people from England, and their religion was called Quakerism. And they were called Quakers because when they would go to worship, they said that when the Spirit of God moves us, we begin to tremble and shake and quake. Right? So it sounds kind of funny, but that was really their belief. And they believed that the light of God is in everybody. And they had a very, very simple approach to life. Well, fast forward many centuries later, my family is in Philadelphia. I'm raised in Philadelphia. And for high school, for 6 years, the last 6 years of high school, I went to a Quaker high school. A very good high school in the United States, was considered a private preparatory high school. And it's called Germantown Friends School because the Quakers, their formal name is the Religious Society of Friends. Now, while it was technically, I guess you could call it a religious school, it was pretty liberal and strong academic. But one thing that would happen one day a week, every Thursday for 40 minutes, whatever your religion was, whether you believed or you didn't believe, whatever, you're Jewish, you're Catholic, you're Christian, doesn't matter. Because you went to the school, you had to go into a room like this. This is actually a photograph from the meeting house at my high school. And you had to sit quietly in silence for 40 minutes. Now, you can imagine that for teenagers, that was pretty hard. But think about it, even children who were 6 years old, 10 years old, had to do this once a week. And I'll tell you that in high school, we hated it. It was boring. We would take naps. We didn't really get it. As we got older, we began to appreciate the time of stillness. And many years later, all of us who have graduated from these sorts of schools, because there are different Quaker schools throughout the United States, we all look back with kind of a romanticism to that time when we could take a pause once a week for 40 minutes and sit in utter silence. And basically, we were being introduced to mindfulness and meditation in our own way. And I'm sharing that story because little did I know that that would really have a lot of meaning during this time. This is a photograph from an article that comes from the Harvard Business Review. It was an article that was published around the first week of March of this year. It's called "That Discomfort You're Feeling is Grief." Now, I'm not pulling this article up because I want you to feel sad, but it actually has some really interesting takeaways. The article is written by Scott Berinato, and in it, it's basically an interview. It's a conversation, and he interviews David Kessler. David Kessler is considered one of the world's foremost experts on grief and on sadness. And I want to share with you two takeaways that I got as they were talking about COVID-19, its impact on the world, and how individuals and society is responding to it. Well, here is my first takeaway. David Kessler explained that we typically think about grief in terms of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stages, right? We think about first stage 1 is denial. Oh, this will go away quickly. Then there's anger. We're really mad that we can't go back to work. Then there's bargaining. We try to say, okay, well, maybe we can go back to work 3 days out of the week. And then there's sadness, right? There's this feeling of loss. When are we ever going to return to normal? And then finally, there's acceptance, right? So typically, traditionally, we think of grief in 5 stages: denial, anger, bargaining, sadness, and acceptance. And we could see this, you yourself probably have gone through these emotions, and even as countries, nation states, companies, we go through these phases. Here is my first takeaway. These stages are not linear. We go back and forth between them. So one day we might be feeling like we completely accept everything. And then before you know it, we're feeling angry. And then denial, and then finally back to acceptance. The first takeaway then that I got is that this is a non-linear process. So if you've been feeling like you're going back and forth between this kind of unsettling time, it's completely normal. My second takeaway, David Kessler explained that there actually should be a 6th stage of grief that we should add on. And the 6th stage of grief should be meaning. MEANING, meaning. What is the point of all of this? And I love that, because if we just end with acceptance, that's kind of a plateau. But if we add on trying to understand the purpose and the meaning of this time, that's when the work that I do becomes particularly important. We have all had to take a pause. We've all had to redesign our relationship with time. Some of us feel like it's Groundhog Day. Every day we wake up and we wonder, what day is it? Where am I? The meetings aren't the same. The way that we mark time with space, with people, with geography is completely gone. And what I'm proposing is that there is enormous value in this time to hold off, to wait, and to pause. And it's particularly valuable because it gives us time to build in meaning and purpose to our work, to our organizational culture, and on an individual level, the meaning of how we have been going through this everyday, daily churn of work. The reason why this is incredibly interesting to me is that, as it was explained, I am a creativity strategist. And what that means is I advise leaders in companies on how to apply creativity and strategic foresight to get to much more transformative business results. There is a direct correlation between creativity and business results, and I'm going to share that at the end of this presentation. But more specifically, creativity is one of the primary ways that we can achieve meaning and purpose. So that's why this value of the pause is especially interesting to me as a creativity strategist. So how am I defining creativity? I look at it in the following way. That creativity is your ability to toggle between wonder and rigor to solve problems and create novel value. That's the simplest way that I'd like to explain it. Creativity is not something that only artists do. To be an incredible scientist, attorney, financier, plumber, farmer, you must be incredibly creative. And how do you do that? You have to always be toggling between wonder and rigor to solve problems. So creativity actually stems from this idea from complexity and chaos theory. It is a chaotic system. And a K-word is a word that D. Hock, who was the first president of Visa credit card, made up. And when he started leading Visa, he said, we need to have an organization that's not made up of boxes and arrows and straight lines, but it has to mimic nature. And in nature, there is both chaos or randomness, and there's also order or structure. So chaos is not anarchy. Chaos is randomness, or in the way that I think about it, it's about wonder. And order is not control. Order is structure. Order is the rigor part of creativity. And I designed a card game to help teams and companies play with this idea of creativity to solve problems. If you want more information, you can go to my website, figure8thinking.com. It's on Amazon as well. But it's really important that we use these tools like play to be much more experimental in our problem-solving approach. So wonder and rigor is actually the way that we can be more creative. And I want to hone in, since we're talking about the value of the pause, on the wonder part. So I define wonder as awe, audacity, big blue sky thinking and asking what if questions. And it's about pausing. It's about dreaming. Rigor is about discipline and time on task and skill development. And here's what we have forgotten. In our organizations, when we are trying to innovate, we have fallen into a bad habit of what I call innovation churn. We have a lot of what we think is rigor, but we have no time or space for the wonder. And here's the thing. Rigor cannot sustain without wonder. And the pause is one of the most valuable ways to delve into wonder. So the value of the pause is as follows. Times of uncertainty, days of uncertainty require foresight, and they are actually perfectly designed for creativity. COVID-19 has accentuated a need to have a creativity mindset. It's an opportunity to apply more of the wonder and the rigor that I just mentioned. And one of the ways we can do that, which is where I'm going to end today, is applying what I call the 3 R's for transformative strategy. Before I get into the 3 R's, I want to explain what I said in the very beginning of my talk, which is that creativity has a business ROI. There's a return on investment if we start with creativity, because innovation is actually applied creativity. Creativity is the engine for innovation. So I would like to explain 3 business results if we start with creativity. The first business result, starting off at this top row, is that if we start with creativity, we will ignite inventive thinking. If we ignite inventive thinking, new business models emerge. And when new business models emerge, one of the absolute valuable things that happens is that we unlock new revenue streams. So that's one of the first business outcomes of creativity, is this inventive thinking leads to new revenue streams. Secondly, if we start with creativity, we must collaborate consistently, right? If we work only in our silos, if we only work with the same sorts of people from the same departments, we will keep asking the same questions and we're never going to get to different answers. So creativity requires that we collaborate on a consistent basis. When you collaborate, in the short term, it's really hard, right? Because you have to translate what you do to new people. It can be a drag. You feel like, why do we have to go through this, right? But in the long term, efficiencies will increase because you will get to different types of opportunities in a shorter amount of time. You will identify barriers more quickly because you will have new people around the table. When efficiencies increase, costs decrease. So that's the second business value of creativity. We collaborate consistently, and that ends up decreasing costs. And finally, when we start with creativity, we must become customer obsessed. Not obsessed with the app or the product or the service that we sell. No, don't start there. Start with your customers. What are their needs? What keeps them up at night? When we become customer obsessed, customer satisfaction amplifies and we increase sales and value. So it's really important that I want you to understand when we're talking about the pause, this time of COVID-19, which taps into the wonder element of creativity, there is an absolutely direct connection between creativity and our business value. So now to conclude, I want to share with what we can actually be doing during this time of the pause. There are, in what I'm doing right now with my clients is I am helping them and advising them on going through 3 phases. And there's a number of ways we can do this depending on the challenges and depending on the objectives. But generally speaking, here's where we should start during this time of the pause. We should start with the first R, which is about restoring and assessing the present state. What is actually necessary and what do we need to edit and remove? Because, for example, my husband is a lawyer. He's an attorney. He works at an international law firm based here in Philadelphia. It's pretty traditional. And already within the first 2 weeks of COVID-19, as they were assessing the present state, all the partners started to discuss, why do we have so much real estate? Why are we going into the office 5 days a week when it turns out we can do business just fine and support our clients just fine with the technology that we have? So they already are thinking about, what if we move to a hybrid model, right? What if we started to save costs by shifting the way we're using our real estate? So restoring is phase 1. The second R is about reorienting, right? So when we pause, I talked earlier about we need to redesign our relationship with time. And that is really hard to do. It's very confusing. It's very disorienting. We have to figure out new anchors in our work. new ways that we relate to our colleagues, new ways that we are connecting with our clients. And one of the best ways to reorient in the way I'm advising clients is to apply foresight. Foresight is not about telling the future, right? It's not looking into a crystal ball and trying to understand, oh, what's going to happen 2 years from now. That's impossible. But what foresight is reorienting yourself to what is around you in the present state, being super, super observant, and then identify multiple possible future scenarios, right? It's not about finding one solution, but possible alternative scenarios, and then figuring out what are the resources that we need to gear up and have in place so that we are prepared. The third R is about rebooting, right? So now that we're restored, we're reoriented, how do we reboot? How do we prioritize and execute on one or two of these ideas? Don't try to do all of them, but really prioritize and then actually execute. So this is the value of this time. It might feel counterintuitive. Many organizations are panicking. They are struggling with serious financial repercussions. While they are being super practical, they also should be valuing this pause and going through these 3 R's of restoring, reorienting, and rebooting. So, to conclude, I hope that you are understanding that while this time is very disconcerting, it can be very off-putting, there's a lot of silver linings that I see. On a personal, individual level, if I go back to what I learned in high school at the Quaker Meeting House when I had to sit in silence for 40 minutes, what a gift. What an opportunity to let things settle, to let things marinate. We need to value this time on a personal and organizational level. If you enjoyed what I had to say and you want to learn more, I have just written a book called The Creativity Leap. If you would like to receive a sample chapter and one of my Wonder Rigger tip worksheets, please text the word create to 33777. It may be hard to do internationally. If that's the case, please email me. And my email is Natalie@figure8thinking.com. And I will also show that on the very next slide. I'd love to hear from you and love for you to get a sample chapter. Here's my email again. It's Natalie@figure8thinking.com. So thank you so much. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and let's see if there are any questions that you have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natalie. It was a pleasure listening to you. And I must admit, when I was listening in, I was like, yeah, she's totally right. And the funny thing is, I have the feeling that most companies that are driven by KPIs seem to be leaving no room at all to do something new. What's your take on that?
I totally agree with you. We have to, it's not that KPIs are bad, right? It's important to have metrics and things on which we're going to use to gauge and judge progress. But it is also important to reassess and add in new key performance indicators. There won't really be culture change to an innovation culture if we don't also incentivize people to be more creative. And the way that you incentivize creativity is that you have to give people the time to be creative, right? For example, Google used to do something called 20% time. They don't do it anymore, but they used to absolutely let, 1/5 of the week, every Friday, you could go off and you could tinker and work on projects that bring you joy, or that, it goes back to some research you used to do years ago. Out of that time was birthed Gmail, right? So we have to give the time. We also have to incentivize by paying people to be more creative. And they will be rewarded with promotions by demonstrating that they were more curious, that they, hey, I think I see my friend Galit, that they were actually trying to implement these principles. So let's start to diversify what we consider to be important KPIs.
Now, hi to all the others. You can't see them yet, but we have an amazing panel coming up. However, we have 1 more minute for one more short question, and this is the following. What if company leaders are afraid of creativity? And they are afraid of it because they either don't understand it or feel uncomfortable not being able to control it. What makes the shift? Leaders see the value of creativity. How do they see it?
Well, selfishly, I think they could read my book, Creativity Leap, and they could really begin to understand that to be human is to be hardwired to be creative. As I started out saying, we have ghettoized creativity in the arts. That's not fair to artists, and it's not beneficial to our society. Right. In my research, I interviewed over 50 people, including Galit Ariel. She's one of the people who's mentioned in my book, to really understand how does wonder and rigor show up in your work. For example, I talked to a couple who are farmers. They own a fruit farm. Farmers are the original hackers. They have to contend with the earth every single day. So we have to shift our mindset about how we are actually understanding creativity. We also have to understand the innovation, which everyone is trying to do, starts with creativity. So we have to hire for creativity. We have to change the way we're interviewing and how we're sussing out. It's not just that you have an MBA from the top business school in your country or in the world, but how do you frame questions? What are you a humble, clumsy student of in your free time? When we are clumsy students, that's actually how we are exercising this mindset to see problems differently, to see, as artists call it, the negative space. So we have to shift mindsets among our leaders. And I'm not only talking about leadership at the top of the organization, but I'm also talking about emergent leaders embedded within the organization. So it's totally possible that, first of all, acknowledge the fear, acknowledge the insecurity, and then ask for help to make that shift, to start hiring differently, cultivating creativity through the incentivization that I just spoke about, and then sustaining it.
Thank you so much. And obviously you listening in as audience, like, yeah, there's a lot to be talked about. And there is, and that's why we have our panel at the ready. The topic of the panel, and Natalie is going to be part of it, is creativity, the hidden essence of every great business. There's only 2 more things for me to do. Number 1, tell you I shall be handing over the stage to my old buddy Stoyan Yankov, and he's a productivity and performance strategist and keynote speaker. However, before that happens, let's roll the intro.
It is time to rethink and to realign. Learn and get inspired. Prepare your questions and enjoy insightful Podim DX panel.
And here he is, live and in color. Stoyan, the stage is yours. Take it away, and see you after this amazing panel. Take it away, brother.
Thank you, Daniel. Can you guys hear me? Seems like amazing intro. Yes, hello everybody. Thank you, Natalie, for setting the stage for this exciting panel discussion. My name is Stoyan, a productivity and performance coach. Just finishing my first book, Perform, The Unsexy Truth of Startup Success. And today I have a chance to be surrounded by a number of rock stars in the field of creativity. So why don't we start with a short introduction? Why don't you guys just share with me very shortly who is on the panel? Let's start with the person who is having her morning coffee right now. Galit.
Unmute. I always have a morning coffee. I take 5 to 10 a day because coffee. So I'm Galit Ariel. My background is actually in physical design and experiential. And from there, I moved to immersive tech and techno-futurism. I currently live in Toronto. I wrote a book also about AR, and I've been a guest on Natalie's book and a guest on Stoyan's show. And I love the company we have here. Oh, indeed, rock stars of creativity.
Thank you, Galit. And let's go to Asia, maybe, huh? How about that? Natalie Turner.
Hi, Stoyan, and lovely to be with you all this evening for me. I'm in the small island of Penang off the northwestern coast of Malaysia. And so fantastic to be with you streaming in Europe. So my background is a bit eclectic. I've been a political speechwriter for the Labour Party in Westminster. I've been an NGO worker in the rubbish heaps in Manila. I've worked with street children in Bogota. I've been a corporate innovation director, an entrepreneur, and in a number of different startups. And I currently run my own business called the NPO Network, and I have an innovation practice around a model I've invented called the 6 Eyes of Innovation, of which obviously creativity is there in the ignite phase. And I'm the author of the book, Yes, You Can Innovate. Discover your innovation strengths and develop your creative potential. And I've been living in Asia now for just over 10 years.
Thank you, Natalie. And maybe let's put a gentleman in the middle. How about Scott the Boom?
Thanks, Stoyan, and hello, everybody. Great to be here. I'm calling in from London today, beautiful 28 degrees. And my background, well, I spent a good few years in ad agencies running global businesses at Saatchi's and at Wieden & Kennedy, things like Nike, Toyota, and was part of the first actual startup, as was Bubble at the time, launching lots of businesses then. And then I moved client side and I've run brands like Diesel, Levi's, Activision, and I now run my own creative consultancy working with some of the world's most creative clients, a lot in media, a lot in advertising, a lot in brands and FMCG, helping them be more creative and be more innovative. And I also have a startup called ThinkSprint, where we allow designers to create their designs and then put them out into the community, either their peers or consumers, and get direct feedback within 24 hours. And I also was a co-author of the book Creative Superpowers, which is now all around the world, and gives really, really clear 4 set of skills for people to learn how to be even more creative in their everyday lives and business.
Thank you, Scott the Boom. Unleash, unlock, unblock, right?
Unblock, unlock, unleash.
Unblock, unlock, unleash. Yes. So since we're in the UK right now, why don't you continue with somebody who's not natively from there, but residing there, Jessica.
Yes. Hey, Scott, I'm waving to you from somewhere in London. As you can tell, I'm not from the UK. I'm originally from the Boston area. I go by Savvy Bostonian on Twitter. Somehow that just stuck with me. But, with my career and my experience, I've been a marketer and public relations professional, worked in-house for lots of exciting companies like Dunkin' Donuts, TripAdvisor, Sprinkler, all before relocating to London. I've started my own marketing consultancy since relocating here. I'm also the co-author of 2 books on storytelling, The Power of Visual Storytelling and The Laws of Brand Storytelling.
Thank you, Jessica. And since we also have Natalie joining us, Natalie, for those of the people who are joining and tuning in right now, why don't you also give us a short introduction?
Hi, thank you so much. Happy to be here. My name is Natalie Nixon. I'm a creativity strategist and the president of Figure 8 Thinking. I'm based in Philadelphia in the United States. And I have a very loopy background in anthropology and fashion. Spent part of my career working as an entrepreneurial hat designer, and then in global fashion sourcing, and lived in Sri Lanka and Portugal and traveled throughout Asia, making bras and panties for Victoria's Secret. And then got tired of being in different time zones from my family, and became a professor. And I was a professor for 16 years and created something called the Strategic Design MBA program, and resigned from academia in 2017, and have been happily building out my creativity strategy practice at Figure 8 Thinking since 2017, and I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you, Natalie. Great to have you here. So let's just get on. My first question to the panel would be, creativity, innovation. Many people see that something more or less, okay, what is that really? It's something fluffy, or what is your definition of creativity? And anybody who would like to start, just give me a sign.
Well, you're starting with the $1 million question, right? Because understanding what creativity is something that neuroscientists and business people and creatives themselves have been trying to do for, I think, years. And I think it's very hard to define creativity. It's kind of this thing that you know it when you see it, because it's so fluid and it changes so much in the context. And I think my biggest issue with the word creativity lately is this, it's not an issue, I love creativity, is that it's been kind of used in ways that don't describe it. So, you know, everyone can be a creative. Yeah, everyone can be creative, but to be a creative is actually a practice, because you apply yourself in not necessarily looking at a KPI and outcome. It's kind of the same thing for me as saying everyone could do math and everyone can be a mathematician. It's not exactly the same thing. So being creative is a state of mind, but it's also a skill and a practice that needs to be applied. And innovation, on the other hand, is something that is a bit more tangible. It's really more about the process and research and analysis, and not to say that everyone can be an innovator, but yes, anyone can innovate. It's just two different qualities. One have a very determined process, and the other one is more free-form.
Yeah, thanks, Galit. That's true. We started with the $1 million question. Would anyone else like to add on top of what Galit described?
I mean, I would just add, I mean, I agree. I think there's a massive debate. When we wrote the book, actually, Creative Superpowers, we had this huge debate with people about creativity with a large C and creativity with a small c. And I think, you know, my belief is creativity and being creative is visceral. It's inside all of us. And the shame for me is when we do get into too much of a debate around it, because people then in business or in life, they lose connection with being creative, and they see the creativity or creativity as this huge thing that they can never attain, and then they just lose the ability to be creative. And so for me, you know, I agree to a degree what Galit said, but you know, for me, just being creative is a massively important part of being a human. And the more that we can encourage people with a small c to be creative, I think the better. And then what comes out of that for me is, from an innovation perspective, is for me, innovation, and I think Natalie made a good point earlier, some of what you were describing, Natalie, I also sort of call innovation theatre. You know, that kind of, like, you know, all businesses love a bit of innovation theatre. And so when I'm working with businesses about innovation, I often talk to them about innovation for me as an idea that creates and adds value to the world, your customers or your business, just in that context of innovation within the corporate. And it takes creativity and creative thinking to firstly open your mind to get to a place where you can create the ideas. And then innovation is the leap, taking the, because ideas to a penny, is turning the idea into something that has absolute value. And for me, that is what innovation in business really requires.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. And you mentioned something really important. You know, we need to be there to boost creativity. What do you think are some of the obstacles on the way of creating this creative, you know, culture in companies? What stays on the way? What are some of the obstacles?
Are you asking me or the panel?
I'm asking the whole panel if somebody wants to.
Yeah, I'll chip in on that one, Stoyan, as well. I think, you know, it's quite interesting, obviously, being in this lockdown over the last couple of months, because you have a lot of time for thinking, even though we're all probably still very busy recreating and reinventing and using a lot of creativity right now. But what I find more and more is that there just isn't the space. There isn't the space for the mind to be in that luminal resting place, you know, like early in the morning, you know, when you get up, and I mean, over here in Malaysia, I watch the sun rise, and I'm in that time, like a time of day where my mind is most creative, where I can just let it be free to just go anywhere, to be wild, to be, you know, to be wondrous, to have that wonder, to have that awe. And then you start the work, you know, and it's suddenly you're like jumping through all your work, and and that creativity, if you haven't had that time to just let it to mull over, it's like if it's just pushed out all the time, then you don't have that space. You don't have that space to then have the connectivity for lateral thinking to take place, for things to emerge. And I think in a lot of our work, whether we're in corporate or in small businesses, we are very, very busy getting stuff done. And we're not really creating these spaces for ourselves and for our own mindset to be challenged as individuals and also within our teams and corporate cultures.
Yeah. And I think just to add off of that, I think something I've experienced in the corporate world is I think culture as well plays a big part in this. I've definitely been kind of the young worker bee, just completely overloaded. I'm trying to be a creative person where you're really dying to create something and just you have ideas that you want to act on, but you don't have the space to do it is really tough. And a lot of that goes back to performance culture. We're rewarded and incentivized based on very specific, rigid targets. And also just, it starts with your manager, but then it also goes up to the executive level. And I think if we really want to drive more creativity, especially in big companies, we need to rethink those processes. I do think startups can be a bit more agile in that way. And I welcome hearing from the panel, what their thoughts are on that.
I just to agree with that, and to say when I speak to CEOs, I probably asked 50 or 60 CEOs over the last 18 months, what is the thing that holds your culture back from being creative as it can be? And it's 3 words: time, space, and tools. And the funny thing is, we can create time and space, which I think is great, and you can make that happen. But quite often, when you're trying to wrestle with quite complicated or complex challenges, people don't have the tools to work with to be able to systematically work through the stuff. So you get lots of things like lots of brainstorming and lots of ideas, but then those ideas never go anywhere because there's too many barriers for them in the organization. They're never going to happen. So it's how do you help organizations create the tools that help navigate all that? There's no shortage of great thinking. How do you help people navigate through that? Keep an eye on the challenge, keep an eye on the boundaries, keep an eye on the reality, and do so with a sense of open-mindedness and have the space to be able to do it.
I would like to comment on what Scott said, and I totally agree with that. But I think that a lot of the time, CEOs and team leaders, they aspire for creativity, they aspire for the intent to have it, they aspire to have it, but they're not actually creating the conditions to have it. So the pressure is double on a lot of people in startups and in tech, like you have to be creative, but you also have to perform and do it on time and be a team member and do this and don't be an individual. But so there's a lot of expectation. And I think those leaders that are truly intending to have some creativity have to let go of some of the other values. They really have to understand that, there's a give and take there. So they can supply tools, but if they don't supply time and space, these tools go to waste. They can supply time and space. If they don't supply tools, again, it comes to waste. So they really have to dedicate and be rigid. And it's so easy, even as a creative, to let go of creativity because, again, the outcome is unknown versus productivity is quite known. We know that if I'll do A, I'll get B. With creativity, you're unsure about what will happen. And this is the wonder of it, right? And sometimes you fail. And I think a lot of people are celebrating failure, but it has to be failure that has to become productive, that we have to learn from it. Everything is kind of like in this machine of quantified outcome versus qualified. And I think this is where it needs to change. And I completely agree with what Natalie said earlier, that the KPIs and the evaluations and the values within companies, and I think was it Jessica or Natalie, everybody were right about the fact that we just have to change the value system that we have in companies in order to really, have creativity and innovation part of the fabric of the company.
May I add one thing, Stoyan? I really appreciate what Scott and Galit have just said, what everyone has said. And I actually, this is when you ask about how do leaders actually apply, the time, space, and tools that Scott has identified CEOs are saying they actually need to do. You have to decide, which is part of what Galit was just saying. You have to make a decision that that's what's going to happen. And that actually is the rigor part that I'm talking about. We romanticize creativity and we only leave it in that wonder space, which is essential. But this is actually a good time when we really do need to observe the sacrifices that artists are doing. So artists are really good at wrestling with the discomfort of ambiguity. Artists are really good at committing to process and not only being solutions focused, right? So some of the shift that has to happen is away from only being focused on a singular solution. What is the answer to, a lot of what foresight practice helps us to do, which is identify multiple possible scenarios to consider. But this is an example of a time when, if we observe the way that dancer choreographers, for example, problem solve, which is what I did in my work in getting to writing The Creativity Leap, is that there actually is a process to commit to the rigor, and it's a decision. And the word decide means to cut. There's some things that are going to have to go. There's some things then that creates the space for the time and space and tools to do this really hard work of creativity.
Thank you guys for those great points. There's something that I really wanted to ask you all. As some of you know, I'm a former movie producer, and I'm always curious to see how can we actually create this creativity. Like, is creativity, there was a famous quote by Stephen King, one of the most prolific writers, and it's amateurs sit and wait for inspiration. The rest of us just get up and go to work. So my question is, for you, all of you published authors, you are working in creative fields. How does creativity happen? Is it the process of I need to wait for the muse, for inspiration, and then in this specific moment I'm gonna go and get it done? Or is it sort of like the opposite, right? You start getting things, and then because of the execution and the quantity of ideas, and then at some point you come up with the right solution, or you progress and create it even better?
So if I can jump first, because me and Stoyan had a chat about writing books last week, and I explained it as one of the most painful processes ever done. It's like giving birth to a baby from your brain.
And then you started the second one.
Yeah, I know. So don't ruin it. So the creative process is actually really painful. And I described, like, writing my first book was like giving birth to a square, sharp-edged baby that comes out from an organ that is not meant to give birth. And it was painful. It is a painful process. And you give the baby away for everyone to touch and comment about. And you swear to yourself you're never going to do it again, but then you do it again, because there is something, like Natalie said, about the process itself. And there's a balance between, I think everybody thinks that creatives sit at home and wait for inspiration, and then they just follow it, and it's like this rosy romantic thing, and they might be suffering, but that's romantic. No, the suffering is real. But there's also, again, so much value from the process, because every time you go through it, you learn and you do something differently and you enjoy that. But absolutely, you cannot sit and wait. You have to kind of like find the way your creativity works for you and dupes you as well, because it also works against you, and find ways to kind of hack your own creativity and keep it going, and start things that will allure it. It's almost, I think Elizabeth Gilbert gave one of the best TED Talks ever, The Elusive Creative Genius, and I stand by it, on the fact that in the past, creativity was something that was external to artists, so they didn't feel so emotionally guilty if they weren't creative. And today, creativity became something that is, failure or success, and being creative or not is something that is in us. So we're responsible for it if we're creative or not. And it's a way of playing with both, understanding your own unique creative voice, but also understanding it's not yours. You have to activate it, is the secret of making it work.
Pablo Picasso said that inspiration exists, but it has to find you working.
Yeah. Ooh, I love that. I think for me, it's a mix of process and serendipity. And what I will say is, I know certain times of day when I'm kind of more creative. So you have to kind of understand that about yourself, how you like to work. I'm not a morning person. I come alive like midday after I've had a few coffees, but also embracing serendipity, because there's if anyone's ever had a great idea while they're in the shower or they're out on a run, when you're not thinking about anything except the great music you're listening to, you know, you'll realize there is that amazing serendipity. Something you've been trying to work through will come to you when you least expect it. And I love that about creativity.
Yeah. Just building on the book writing, I'm actually on the second draft of a novel, and it's interesting going through the process of creative writing as against writing a business book, which was a creative endeavor, but it's a very different type of process. And you know, within that first draft, you're just getting your story down. You know, I've written 100,000 words of this story, and the idea for it was born in the temples of Angkor Wat in Cambodia. I mean, it's like this random thing. Now I'm in the second draft, and I'm like, oh my God, why did I set this book in Cambodia in these temples? Now I've got to go and learn all about this, and this, and get my head into this 32-year-old Cambodian man who's one of my characters. And yeah, so it's really interesting. When you think at the beginning, you think, oh yeah, that's a good idea. Even in the creative process itself, you're suddenly thinking, wow, you know, you've got to like expand your own horizon, your imagination. You've got to push yourself out there. And certainly you've just got to sit and think and write and structure, particularly in the second draft. And then in the third draft, I have heard, I've not got there yet, it's all this, it's really when you're focusing on the writing itself and, you know, making every word count and you know, making sure you know, from the second draft where you're looking at logic, to really looking at, you know, that you've got great prose and you can actually write. So I like all that. I love this sort of dance of the mind between sort of free flow to structure. And I think that being creative needs that boundary of structure so that it can have shape and then it can appear into something and actually have some value of whatever it might be that we want to create. And I like what Galit said about Elizabeth Gilbert, because I've just been listening to her recent TED talk. And it's fantastic. If anyone's not listened to it, it's really good with Tim Ferriss. And just around this whole aspect of the genius piece, and that things are looking for us. You know, ideas are looking for hosts. They're looking to sort of land in us, and that we then have a responsibility to bring that out. I really love that.
Yeah, thanks so much, Natalie. And I think what you mentioned is something a lot of times creatives are forgetting, to put some structure. Mm-hmm. I believe the best creativity happens when you have clear, you know, clarity on vision, clarity on objective. And then in terms of the process, just accept it's going to be messy. You know, you might plan it. You might say, hey, you know, I'm going to write 5 pages of my book this morning. Yeah, and then you sit down, you get your coffee, and you know, you never know. It's a. Of course, you can focus and you can do your very best, but it's a creative process. And I actually wanted to put this a little bit in the context of startups. How could startups, you know, who are busy, probably working, you know, founders working 10, 12, 14 hours, you know, building the product, talking to customers, whatever, how could they, you know, create space and time for this stillness, for this space for creativity to happen? And in terms of all the things, yeah.
I do when I work with CEOs or leaders that I do my exec coaching with, I often have this conversation with them about, they say to me, Scott, I'm really quite good at time management. You know, I try and do all these things. And then I actually say to them, okay, write down all the people who manage your time for you. So it could be, I don't know, PA and people in their team and everything else. And then they look at how much time they've got left. And they go, oh, I've got an hour a week. That's my time. So I get them to flip that model and say, right, the model is now time ownership. It's not about time management, it's time ownership. I want you to block in all the time that you want to own to enable you to think through things differently, to reframe your challenges, to have time to think, to have space, to be able to have clarity on working on your business and not in your business. And then they do that, and then they go, oh, right. Then they realize that owning time is one of the most important things for anyone to do, particularly in a startup, because you won't ever get that time back. And then what you just need to do is, in that time, I'm a massive fan of the concept of beautiful constraints, because, you know, creativity isn't, you know, like that thing where you just sit and look out the window and everything happens for you. But you need to be really kind of focused on what is the thing I'm thinking about? What's the challenge I'm thinking about? It's all Jungian theory. You think about stating intent to the world. So if you're doing nothing else, block out the 2 hours that you need. Say, I really need to think about, I don't know, like somebody said to me in one of the mentoring sessions today, how do we make the most out of this challenge that we've got with COVID? Is it a recession, or how do we flip the recession? And then state the intent out, and then use that as a constraint. Because once you state intent out into the world and you have clarity on the challenge, then you get alignment. So you might want to have a look out the window, you might want to walk around the room, you might want to have a look at a couple of things. But what happens is your brain really focuses in on the challenge, and then the world will help you think about how you might solve that. And I do a thing called street wisdom, which is exactly built around that. But if you can just have that discipline for yourself, the law of kind of psychology and how our brains work will serve you really, really well. But it starts with the idea of time ownership and not allowing time management to dictate how you run your business. And then the rest will hopefully fall into place.
And I think it's also part of this productivity narrative of like, if you're busy all the time, there are sure results. And it's also about dismantling it, because one can be busy all their time building their business and the wishful outcome might not come. But if you have intention in what you're building and kind of focus, and for that you need time for yourself, then you have better results probably. And I think, again, it's like, it's a scheme that people are falling into. Like, if you're in startup, you have to be busy all the time. You have to have these 14 hours days. Like, otherwise, if, I lived in the UK for a while. So as a student there, like no pay, no gain. If your teachers haven't seen you break down, you will not pass the semester. Like, they need to see that Victorian pain oozing out of you. Otherwise, you haven't been creative. And I think we have to be more forgiving to ourselves and kind of like forget about a little bit about this trade-off, because sure, you have to work hard, but you also can do it while you're enjoying it and while you're taking time and while you're creative, and probably you will actually have better outcome from that. So again, it's like changing the kind of like the hacker, disruptor, crush it narrative that have been running around, and you all know what I think about that. That's been running around like it's the only way is like to attack it and fight it and never rest and never sleep. And if you don't sleep, and actually a lot of it is very toxic and actually very counterproductive.
I also think it's interesting that, there's cultural context for creativity, and even using the words like ownership and time is very interesting to me as an anthropologist, because not all cultures have that relationship with time. And it's something we have to control, we have to own, we have to manage, right? That language is very interesting, just as an observation. And another approach is just living a life where you kind of just synchronize with time. And even when cultures cultures and even times in our culture, historically, when we sorry, there's mowing outside. I don't know if you can hear that, but when there was more of a maker culture, I think about fishermen, there's just time in the work and process of being a fishing. There's a lot of waiting. There's a lot of knitting that happens, the knitting construction of the nets. There's all of this embedded work that helps us to have a very different relationship with time, where creativity is much more integrated and embedded with the work than in the current culture of work. I can speak very specifically to the United States.
All right, thanks guys. It was very interesting actually, Galit. We had a conversation a week ago and I asked you to be a guest of my productivity show. And you were like, productivity? I don't want to have anything to do with this. And then we have a discussion. We actually spoke about what productivity means for you and for me. And it's all about this mindful productivity where you understand yourself, you're self-aware who you are and how do you function at your best. And it's not only about producing results. It's about also being happy, being joyful. And I think we don't talk so much about it sometimes. We don't talk about you do your to-do list and you put in your to-do list, let me prioritize 30 minutes of happiness, or let me see how I can make my work more fun, more happy. This is very interesting kind of a field for me. We just got a question, and I'm curious to hear what you guys, your answer would be. Can there be too much creativity?
That was going to answer.
Well, that's beautiful.
I can jump in. I mean, I think the reason why everyone's hesitating is because the answer is yes and no, right? Like
yes and no, yes.
because on one hand, right, we're all creative people. We live in a creative, happy world. We want to encourage people to be creative, but I also think, when you think about innovation, and actually sometimes taking some of those ideas to fruition, if you're only kind of in this creative space, are you actually being productive? Are you actually kind of, are you delivering something that's meaningful? So that's maybe where I'll start it. And I welcome you guys to jump in and hack away at it.
Oh, thank you for that, Jessica. That was like, I was like, oh, do I say it? And so I think yes and no. So no, there's no such thing as too much creativity, because it's one of the most beautiful human qualities. As far as we know, we're one of the only species that actually have it in a manifested way that made it into an art form and a basis for society. So I think there's not enough creativity sometimes, and you can't have too much. But that, again, that is when you live in the romantic, in the mind of creativity and how beautiful it is. And when you have exponential resources and you live in an environment where you don't have to take care of the basic needs, which you actually need for creativity, but that's another discussion. But because we are living in this dimension, in this physical world, living only in the creative, unless you're a trust fund child, can lead you to be disconnected from the real needs and real thing. And there's a difference between creative and beauty, and that can solve a lot of problems, can create a lot of value, and actually producing outcome and creating innovation that solves the hard problem of eating, surviving, evolving in other ways. So there could be, or not, again, this is the question, where do you find yourself standing? Are you in the mind? Are you in the vision of humanity, or are you in the making part of humanity? And some people stand in one, and that's fantastic for them. Super creative people, they just create, and that's what they do, and they don't need reward for it. And some people really need a functional thing. And it's really understanding where you stand on this spectrum, because everything is a spectrum. And once you identify more or less where you are and where you want to be, I think you can become a lot more calmer, like whether you're creative or functional, because we're normally have a bit of both or more from one and the other.
Yeah, can I just build on that as well? I often talk about, what does the idea need, and what does the idea need next in order to take it wherever it might need to go next? And sometimes that might be, it needs more creativity. And other times it might be actually, well, it needs some really rigorous critical thinking, or maybe it needs some resources, or it needs some investment, or maybe it actually just needs to get into a project plan and actually take shape into something. And I think that sometimes what can happen, particularly in startup land, where a lot of founders are the originators, they are the creators often of the idea, is that they can overplay their strength. And I know that for myself as well, being a person that loves to initiate new ideas, is that you can just end up with too much of your own strength, overplaying coming up with yet another idea. Oh yeah, and then another idea. And what about over here? And oh, this is interesting. And your mind's bouncing around and dancing around. And sometimes the idea on which you were maybe working on initially has got lost. It's sort of lost its way somewhere because you've overplayed that strength of creativity. So I think it's this this is where the art, I think, of creativity, coming into innovation as well as into something, creating something of worth, this is the art form. This is where we have to understand ourselves and also know when we need to stand back from that idea and look at it and say, what do you need? How do I steward you to the next phase, even if I'm not the best person to take you there? So you're looking at it that way as well.
Thank you, Natalie. And I can see time is flying like, whoa. And since we're getting close to the end of this session, to wrap it up, I know, Galit, I know. Since we're getting close to the end we're getting close to the end of this session, I would like to invite you guys with, with a final less than a minute message. What did you kind of share with the people watching? Maybe, something simple advice or just some good energy. What would be your final message? And let's start with Natalie Nixon.
My final shout out is something that I have been signing off in my emails, which is to stay buoyant. Buoyancy is a wonderful metaphor, I think, for flow, which we all know is a big component of creativity. And it's also about relinquishing control and reframing perspective. I'm a swimmer as well as a dancer. And when you're swimming in the ocean and you're getting tired or cramping, you flip over to your back, and that automatically that buoyancy becomes so prevalent, and you shift perspective. All of a sudden you see the sky. So for me, the message is to stay buoyant as a way to embrace however the creativity is going to manifest in your work. Thanks.
Beautiful. Let's go with Jessica.
My message is that you can drive change. Whether you're a startup founder or you're kind of really far down the totem pole in a big company, I've been in both places. And when I used to be the global social media lead for Dunkin' Donuts, I actually started, an innovation program trying to teach people about social and drive creativity within the org. And, if I was a team of one, and if all the ideas came from me and my amazing agency partners, we'd only think about things one way. And, by looping in, 20 other plus people across the organization, there were so many fresh perspectives that made our program so much better. And I just encourage you to think within kind of what you can drive. And then once kind of the higher up started to realize this, we started to drive more of that thinking across the company, which was really amazing.
Thank you, Jess. Scott.
I'm just going to leave you with the correct 3 U's for my operating system, Stoyan, which unblock, unlock, unleash, because I just think it will help people think about creativity potentially in a different way. So unblock means get all the blockers, all the things that are currently sitting in your mind around the challenge, around your puzzles, and get them all out on the table so you know what you're dealing with. You can't actually, from my perspective, you can't come up with great thinking, great ideas and move forward if you've just got a load of blockers that aren't going to change. So think about those, unblock them, and when you're unblocking them, unlock new inspiration, new ideas, new thinking. Get it from anywhere that you can. And like we said earlier, it's all about how do you get as much stimulus as possible, join the dots. The last thing is unleash. Just create action, however small, and make it happen.
Thank you, Scott. Galit.
My take is don't worry about it. in a sense that, I think a lot of people are really scared of reaching out, like, because they think like they need to perform even creatively, and like, what if I try to be creative and it fails? So I'm like, you might not be able to be fearless, but please try to fear less of it and experiment, look inwards, look outwards, ask for help, and you will reach it or not. And that's okay. So don't worry about it.
Thank you, Galit. And Natalie Turner.
Well, if the mentoring that we've done over the last couple of days, which I must say has been wonderful and insightful, and there is just so much creativity in this space, in this conference over these last 2 days, that is, I would say that you're born for this time right now, and to just really embrace it. And the world needs your ideas. And the world needs new ways of thinking. It needs a broad imagination. It needs people that are going to push out what we already know and help us evolve to the next level of our own growth. And I think that the people that are attracted to this conference, you are those people. And you know, like the whole thing with the muse and the sort of that sense of the idea-seeking hosts, you know, you are the hosts. And so I would say, just be clear on your purpose. Be clear on who you are, your strengths, play to your strengths, but never at the expense of what your idea needs in order for it to become an innovation that will have impact and will change people's lives around the world. And I would say, yeah, go for it. Yes, you can innovate.
You can be innovating. You can be innovating. You can be innovating. You can be innovating. You can be innovating.
Thank you, Natalie, and thank you, Galit, for this. On my side, I would say it's very interesting times we're going through, and I think one thing I try to remind everybody I talk to is just, as cliche as it sounds, is just stay positive and focus on the things that are within your control. Ask yourself the right constructive questions instead of, why is this happening to me? What can I do about it? So focus on solutions, focus on the good things, and keep your mind in a good place. It's been such a pleasure to be part of this discussion with these creative rock stars. And thank you so much, Podim, for creating an exceptional virtual experience in such a short time. It's just impressive. Daniel, back to you, brother.
Thank you
so much. And I'm loving the energy that just came out of this whole panel. It was so full of joy and happiness and so on. And by the way, Galit, you made me just want to listen to the song Three Little Birds by Bob Marley. That's exactly what I'm going to do once I've handed over this beautiful little setup to my non-bearded brother over in Maribor. And between you and me, as always, all we need is the intro.